Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Chax Chat podcast. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And we wanted to remind everybody that coming up pretty soon, next month in March, Dax and I are going to be at the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference in Anaheim, California. And we're really excited because we just printed up a bunch of amazing sticker sheets that we're going to be giving away at the conference. So if you plan on attending CSUN, stop by our booth, which is booth number 432. And say hello, say hi to us. We'd love to meet you guys. We'd love to hear about, your accessibility journey, and just would love some time to chat with you. So hopefully you're going to be there, and we look forward to seeing you out at CSUN. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as director of training solutions and principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am Adobe certified PDF accessibility trainer, and I am director of media productions here at Chax Training Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. And if you'd like your certification too, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and get yours. How you doing, Chad?
Doing well.
Awesome.
Most of the snow has melted. We got about 8 inches of snow on I think it was Tuesday. Yeah. And I was telling you that shortly after it got done snowing, the sun came out and started melting most of it. So
we're still raining.
Those are the snows we like to get,
Yeah.
the ones that don't hang around too long.
Because that makes it mush though, right? You get a lot of mush.
Well, listen, on the East Coast, snow is usually mush as soon as it falls. It's wet snow. It's heavy snow. The last snow we got was actually powder. And that's like really uncommon, at least as south far as I am in Pennsylvania. My son lives in New Hampshire, and they often get a lot of really good powder. But down here, it's usually wet, heavy snow. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Cool beans. Well, let's get right into the topic today. So today we're going to talk about nested structures. So we're talking about things like lists and TOCs and tables, tags that have other tags inside them, and how that works, right? So recently in the Facebook group, I got a little bit of education because I improperly assumed I mixed up a few things. And this is why we keep up on the standards, guys. You never stop learning. Even someone like me and Chad, we often, we go back and we do deep dive. In fact, before this podcast, we did a little deep diving to make sure we were on track. And what we uncovered was in a list structure, it is perfectly fine to have the L, which is your list container, the LI, which is your list item. And then inside that, I was under the impression that if you use the LBL, which is the label, like your bullet or number, whatever, that you have to have the L body, that both of them have to be together, that you can't just have an L body. Obviously, you probably would never have just an LBL, but that if you have one, you have to have the other. And I was wrong. We looked it up in the PDF UA standard, which if you guys don't have a copy of the PDF UA standard, I know that they gave it away for free for a while. I'm hoping that it's still for free. I haven't actually looked, but in the table 336 standard structure types for list elements, it talks about the list item and the LBL and L body. And in fact, it tells you that you can have a list item can contain one or more LBLs and L bodies. And the reason why we figured out that it said more than one, right, Chad, was because what was that reason for?
Well, yeah, we were talking about this. I think potentially there's two reasons, right? One reason is for the instance of nested lists, right? Where when you have let me try to paint this picture, right? You've got a numbered list 1, 2, 3, 4, but on list item number 4, you've got 3 bulleted items that fall underneath number 4. So in the tag structure, the bulleted items are its own list
Right.
that lives typically inside of the L body
Yep.
of the list item number 4 in the example that I'm giving here, right?
Right.
So you have kind of a list inside of an L body, inside of an LI, and it's nested accordingly. And that's how, what am I trying to say? Subordinate lists are structured,
Sure.
within the tag structure, right? And I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, I think you and I are on the same page with this. I'm a huge advocate of not overly complicated list structure.
I really tell people no more than 2 levels deep. And that's my own
Yeah.
preference
Oh,
because
for
I've
sure.
had I literally use a screen reader every single day. I try to keep really, I'm trying to really force myself to consider myself as a native screen reader user. The more I use it, the more I get comfortable with it, and it helps me with my dyslexia a little bit too. So, but what I know is that I've been in documents where I have like 5 levels, like the entire meeting notes for a meeting is all
Yeah.
bullets one way or the other. And to hear list level 1, list level 2, list level 3, list level 1, and it going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth is so mentally taxing that it's almost unlistenable.
For me, it's so easy to get lost.
Yeah.
Like as I'm reading this, because I think it's a significant mental exercise to, in your brain, try to remember where exactly you are in the hierarchy.
Yep.
Right. And so I love your recommendation of no more than 2 levels deep, because I think that's plenty. If you go further than that, I mean, before you know it, because every time you go to a new list, it says list with, so the example I gave earlier, numbered list, it'll say list with 7 items. Well, you get down to number 4 and you read number 4, and then it says list with 3 items.
Right.
Well, that's the list for the 3 bulleted list items.
Right.
Now, if you have sub items of the bulleted list,
Yeah. It
each
gets,
one of the bulleted items has a list with, and I
yeah.
get lost. I mean, I really struggle with it. So that would be a great thing. I'd love to get feedback from native screen reader users to understand how they feel about that, right? What their experience is, because I gotta believe it's really easy to get lost in that web of a nested list.
Well, I know for sure it is for me. So as
Yeah,
I go
yeah, I
through that
agree.
list and trying to remember where I'm at, and sometimes it doesn't matter where you are in the list. You're just hearing that list of its own, but
Mm-hmm.
trying to keep track of things that have a hierarchy, that have a meaningful level association, that just really make it a heading, guys. Just split it out and
Yeah.
make it a heading and give a heading, and then start your next list, maybe just 2 levels and then another heading and 2 levels, right? I really feel like if you go beyond 2 levels, look at your structure and identify if you can make your level 1 a heading rather than a bulleted item.
Well, and I think this is a good time to bring this up. And I think we've talked about this on the podcast previously. But when you have numbered headings,
Right?
right? And so if you're not careful, um, you could create headings where each heading is a list,
Well, yeah,
right?
by
And
default,
each
some of
heading,
the, yeah,
yeah, it's tagged as a list.
right.
And you really got to be careful with that, because that's really not a great user experience, because it's not going to be voiced as a heading, for one, right? Which is not helpful. And two, it's going to say list with
One
one
item.
item, right?
Yes,
And I would
every
say a
time.
list with one item is not a list.
It's a pair of socks with one sock. It's not a pair of socks, right?
so,
So,
I mean, to give everybody a little bit of, again, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but the way to get around that is, like, if you're doing this in Word, feel free to use the automatic numbering feature, but make sure you map that style to a heading tag, or
yes.
to a heading level,
Yep.
and then that'll tag it as an H tag instead of a list, and
Yep.
that'll be a much better experience. Yeah, yeah,
And while we're talking about numbered lists in Word, remember that if you make let's say you use Arial bold and, for your heading, or Arial heavy, I guess. and then you press that little B key to make it bold. You basically said, here's a bold font, and I want you to add an extra bold on it because I just want it to be that little bit more bold. What
Boldify it again.
Yes. What happens to your numbered list is there's a hidden checkbox on export from Word that says, if there's a missing font, change the text to a graphic. And what that does is you'll go into your PDF and go, why are all my headings tagged as a figure? And I don't understand this. And it's usually just the number. For whatever reason, it's just the number because Word can't figure out what a font Arial bold is. So it says, well, we don't have that font, so I'm going to make it an image. And so you end up with some or part or all of your heading for that 1.3.2 is tagged as a figure. Very frustrating. You can uncheck that box on export and it solves it, right? But
yeah,
the better way is pick a different font or just be okay with Arial bold being Arial bold.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's one of the things, people are probably tired of hearing me say this, but it's one of the things I love about InDesign is that it doesn't let you do that. Like
right.
In InDesign, you pick your font family and you pick your style, whether it be bold, italic, whatever. Yep. And there's nothing more than that. That's yep. all you can do. You can't double bold it or
you can't stack overrides.
Yeah.
So that's a thing, right? The other thing, so what we want to talk about another thing though that relates to the list. It's kind of a companion of checking for the LBL, right? Is that when you have a footnote, oftentimes in some programs, they will export the number of the footnote as an LBL. So you'll have a reference link at the bottom, and inside that reference will be your LBL and then the text. And Acrobat will say, it will give you a fail. It will say an LBL, not a child of a list, I think I'm not exactly sure what the exact error is, but it says, hey, your LBL is outside of the list structure. Inside Acrobat, when you go into the Acrobat checker, you can actually find a feature in there in the checker. So if you go to accessibility and then accessibility check, there's a drop down in the middle where all the checkboxes are. Typically, it's on page content or document. Actually, it's typically on, it's by default, it's on forms, tables, and lists. Yeah. And so if you look down at the bottom, you should have table summaries unchecked. But then at the very bottom of that, it says LBL and LBody must be children of an LI. If you uncheck that, it will remove that false error of the LBL because it is fine for an LBL to be a child of a reference tag, right? I mean, that's normal for it to be the child because the LBL is the numbered system for that piece of text.
Right. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, an LBL can also be a child of a paragraph.
Agreed.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think in the example,
endnote or footnote. If the endnote or footnote is tagged as a reference, then it can have the LBL as its own, kind of solitary item. So,
I mean, I've always, I get that it works and I get that it's valid. It just never really made a whole lot of sense to me. Like from a logical standpoint, like I prefer the reference tag, right? Sure. Like if I'm gonna have a footnote reference and again, like I said, whatever your preference is totally fine. But for me, having a label inside of a P tag, it just seems odd to me. But
but here's the thing we have to remember: as remediators, we always get caught up in this. I don't know, a need to change things. And if my program exports it out with an LBL, I'm not spending the time changing that LBL because I prefer it a different way, and vice versa. If your program does not include the LBL, but you're like, well, but it's supposed to be, and PDF UA says it can be this way, don't spend the time if it's not going to have a net result. First of all, the first thing is you need to comply with the standard. period, right?
Mhm.
The second thing you should be doing is don't change things unless it's a barrier, right? If you look at I was looking at a document yesterday and it had 2 columns of links, and I thought, oh, that's a list. And I thought, but is it? Is it a barrier that the end user doesn't know it's a list of 11 items? In this case, I thought it was, because if I hear additional resources heading level 2 list 11 items, that tells me how many items are in that resource area. It's providing me important information rather than just hearing link, blah, 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 link, whatever the thing is, 11 times in a row. But oftentimes we find that people will just change something because, well, they think it's a better way, or they think it's more logical to be this other thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to remove barriers, right?
Well, and I guess so. I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
I think you got to define barrier, right? Because I'll tell you what pops into my head. My client, when I submit my remediated file to them, they like to run my file through the Acrobat Accessibility Checker
Sure.
to verify compliance,
Yep.
right? And what you just explained to our audience, without turning off that option, they're going to get an error on all those label tags.
True. Yep.
So I think, barrier is a broad term, right? Like we typically refer to barriers from an accessibility standpoint. But if my client is going to be checking these documents arguably inappropriately, that becomes a barrier for me, because every time and not an accessibility barrier, I'm just saying from a workflow standpoint,
true,
that's going to become a challenge for me. So I may take the time for that particular client, pull it into Common Look, say, find every label that's a child of a P tag or a child of a reference tag, change it to reference. And that probably wasn't a good analogy, right? Any label that's a child of a P tag, change it to a reference.
Well, the LBL is going to be just the number, right?
Right.
So you're saying
which
change the
you'd tag
number
that as a
to
reference.
a reference.
Yep.
But isn't the whole thing the reference and not just the number?
What do you mean the whole thing? You mean the note?
Well, the note, yeah. So it says 1, Sacramento Society of whatever.
So in the case of a footnote, the number 1 or 2 or whatever is the reference tag, and then the footnote itself is a note tag, right? And most programs, the way they'll structure that is in the tag hierarchy. You'll have the reference, and right below it is going to be the note tag. That's how it's going to structure that. That's how InDesign structures it. That's how Word structures it. It just kind of puts it in position within the tag structure.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think that, again, what we want to impart onto our listeners is that spending time to change the tags tree solely because you believe it's a better user experience is something you should try to avoid, or be very judicious about what you're doing. Because you may be making a better user experience, but the client's not paying for that. The user may not know or care about the difference. And in a production environment, we got to get through stuff. And one of the complaints we hear all the time is accessibility takes too long. And you start talking to them and they're like, well, but I changed this and I changed that. And I'm like, yeah, you're doing all that as a preference. That doesn't, part of what we're doing is do no harm, right?
Well, and again, I think in general, a lot of us will get sucked into this making a decision based on our opinion.
Yes.
Right.
That's, yeah.
And I highly encourage everybody, like if you're doing something in a file, make sure it's based on fact, right? Like make sure that what you're doing it purposefully and because it is a problem or a barrier. Don't do it because you're like, I think it should look like this. Avoid that, because that'll get you in trouble and it'll waste a lot of your time, right? and Dax, you and I see this all the time where like how many people have come to us and said, oh, I'm going in and removing all those span tags inside of a P tag.
Right.
And we're like, why? And
Yeah.
they're like, well, because they shouldn't be there. And we're like, well, I don't know that I agree with should or should not be there. I think the reality is that assistive technology doesn't really voice them if you use assistive technology properly.
Right. So I
So,
just wanted a little clarification on the use of a note and the reference tag, right?
okay.
So a note, according to PDF UA, a note is an item of explanatory text, such as a footnote or endnote, that is referred to from within the body of a document. It may have a label, LBL, as a child. The note may include, as a child of the structure, the body text that it refers to, or it may include, or may be included elsewhere, as in an endnote. And accessed by means of a reference. Okay. So Tag PDF does not prescribe the placement of the footnote in the page order, right? This is the conversation we always have. Where do we put the footnote? Does it go right after the reference in the paragraph, at the end of the paragraph, or at the end of the page? Obviously, that's a whole nother conversation. A reference tag is a citation to content elsewhere in the document. So really, okay, I guess they are the same thing. I think I read this initially as a reference as something referred to outside, so like an external hyperlink or something. So I read that wrong. So both a note and a reference are considered links or tags that identify content linked somewhere else in the document. So
Yeah. Yeah. And
awesome.
I mean, understand, and again, these are things you would discover as you test documents with assistive technology.
Right.
The ref, if a number, if a number is tagged as a reference, you don't know it.
Right. No, that's very
Assistive
true.
technology doesn't voice it. It doesn't say reference one. I mean, I think that would be super helpful, right?
Well, and
And I
that's
mean,
why. Go ahead.
well, you and I have talked about this conundrum in the past, right? Like, if you have a sentence that ends in 2024, like the sentence is, these were the statistics for the year 2024, right? And let's say you put a reference after 2024 for a number one.
Right.
It's going to be voiced as 241.
Right, because it
Sorry,
includes
I
the
need to write
number.
this down.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
I
doing it
know,
in my
huh?
head. But you know what I mean? It voices it as one giant big number,
This
right?
is why my preference is that you
Yep.
make a reference a link, because then the end user will hear link one, right? And we go a little further than that by making the putting it inside brackets. So you get a left bracket, link one, right bracket, and then the user can then activate that link to go to it or not. If you don't, there is no way for the end user, either if you don't include brackets at minimum, or you don't make it a link at minimum, one of those two approaches, there's no way for the end user to know that it is a superscript reference
Yeah.
to the footnote or endnote, right?
Yeah. I think it's one of those areas where I really would love JAWS and NVDA to kind of step that up a little bit and just voice those references, because
Yep.
it would really clarify things quite a bit,
Yeah.
because right now it can be really confusing.
Well, and if
But
you want
yeah,
some,
you're right. I love your bracket. You had told me that years ago
yeah,
about putting the brackets around the reference, and I love that because it just naturally separates the reference from whatever preceded it.
right.
Or yeah, yeah.
And if you want more examples of note and reference tags and how you kind of combine or use them, the tagged PDF best practices syntax guide, that's a mouthful, 4.2.7 and 4.2.8 are the sections for note and reference. And in both cases, they show you, the note specifically shows you examples of a P tag with a reference tag inside it with an LBL, and then a note with the LBL. So basically the reference that it's being referenced, that is being used, and then the note in which contains the text for that reference. So how those pairs work together, it's a really good example of what that is. And then for the reference, it talks about the use of a reference in a TOC, right, Chad? And that's kind of our segues right into our next topic, which is
it
the
does.
the next nested set, which is a TOC, right?
Yep. So, the TOC, I think I can with assurance say this, that the only way you're going to get a TOC in your resulting PDF is if you use the table of contents feature in the source application.
Yep.
So whether it
Yeah.
be InDesign, whether it be Word, PowerPoint doesn't have a TOC feature, but the only way you're going to get it is using a source application, and it's a really good thing because that feature does so much for you,
Yeah.
right? So not only from an accessibility standpoint is it going to tag it correctly, but it also makes every entry of the TOC a link that both cited and users of AT can follow to get to that section of the document. I mean,
Right.
it's hugely beneficial to everyone.
Well, it's really like having bookmarks. So we realized that, what is it? F6 in Acrobat is the hotkey that bounces you from the bookmarks bar to the menu at the top, and then to the page content itself. And it's cumbersome to get back and forth between those. So if you are an assistive technology user and you want to activate a bookmark, you've got to press F6 to remember where you are, get to the bookmarks, and then
Yeah.
press F6 twice again to get back to the regular content. So the POUR principle, robust, says that there should be multiple ways to navigate your document, and the bookmarks is one way to do it. But also, if you have a TOC, it's an on-page bookmark set that doesn't require the user to jump back and forth between the windows. The problem most people have is they hear chapter 1, link 2, and they're like, well, why do I hear link? Well, the reason you hear link is because a reference tag is announced as link when it comes to a TOC. So you hear link when it gets to the reference tag, and then what do you have inside the reference tag? Another
Another
link.
link.
And so you hear link again. So several of the automated tools that export a PDF with a TOC will have a reference and a link tag. And it's not wrong to have it. It's just that assistive technology interprets it incorrectly. And so you hear link. And so what you can do is simply remove the reference tag and have the P tag for, you have a TOC for your TOC, your main heading, then a TOCI for each item. Then inside the TOCI is a paragraph. And then you can just simply remove the reference tag and have the link tag be the next tag. And that will solve it. If you're using Common Look, the easiest thing is just select the TOC, hit delete, highlight the TOC, and hit the TOC button, and it automatically generates an entire perfectly coded TOC, which is super great. So I love that tool. But if you're not using Common Look, you can just go into the tag structure and remove those reference tags while leaving your link tag, so that the end user gets the, introduction link 5, page 5 or whatever
Yeah.
the case may
Yeah.
be.
Well, and I mean, that's another, I'll bring this up again, right? The table of contents is not voiced by assistive technology, right? Like you would think like, how when assistive technology reads a list, it says
Right.
list with 12 items. I would love for it to say table of contents containing 15 items,
Yep.
and you can navigate through there. I think that would be a really helpful thing. But as of now, it's not really voiced. Now, I don't think it's really hard to figure out that you're in a TOC because it's going to say, again, a classic example, chapter 1, 15, chapter 2, 27, whatever. Um,
But will it though, Chad? Typically it'll say chapter 1, 35.2. And why does it do that?
Well, NVDA will do that, right? NVDA will say, chapter 1, 87, 15. And you're like, what am I hearing? What does that mean? Well, what it's telling you is chapter 1 followed by 87 dots, which is the dot leader, if you will, right? The dot leader
Right.
going across. So say chapter 1, 87, and then it'll read the number for where the page number, right? So it'll say chapter 1, 87, 15. And you're like, I don't know what that means,
Yeah.
So I mean, I'll bring this up again. I recently, if you go to my LinkedIn page, I recently created a video to show you how to artifact those dot leaders in Adobe InDesign. You can artifact them in a PDF as well. And
you should upload that video to our YouTube channel, Chad. We're for those of you listening, right? We have quite a few. We have quite a few listeners. We get about 1,500 podcast downloads a month, somewhere between 15 and 1,800. We have about 300 YouTube followers. So if you're not following us on YouTube, that would be great. Go follow us on YouTube so we can get to 1,000, so we can turn on some of the other features that we can get when we have that many followers, which includes transcripts and some other things. But yeah, Chad, you should upload that to our YouTube channel. And for those of you listening, there's lots of other really cool stuff on our YouTube channel. And that is good things to know. But
there
Chad,
is.
you wrote this article about how to create a TOC in InDesign that artifacts the dot leaders automatically. That's really great, and it's a really great approach. In Common Look, there's actually a button that is artifact dot leaders, and you just press it. I think the biggest takeaway here, though, is that you would never know that user experience we just described unless you were testing your document with a screen reader.
Yeah. Well, because what I wanted to tell you, you're right. NVDA does what we just described. It'll say chapter 1, 87, 15. JAWS will say chapter 1, ...
Right.
15.
Right.
JAWS takes a slightly different approach on how it lets you know. And I think I like JAWS's method a little bit better, right? Like, I could deal with ... a little bit easier than I can 87, 15, because it gets so confusing so quickly.
Yeah.
But
well, and if you have a numbered TOC, then it's really hard, because you hear, if your chapters are 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4.5.6, you're going to hear 18.1.4.5. I mean, it's going to be wrong.
You're making my brain hurt.
I know.
You're making as I think about it, I'm like, man. So yeah, and that's the value of testing with a screen reader, right? People are like, do I really need to do this? Those are the things that are going to rear their ugly head while you're testing.
Yeah.
And those are the things that make us, those are the cases where I would try to go the extra mile and be like, you know what? I do not like this experience. How can I make it better? Even if the client's not willing to pay for it, if it takes me 10 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
10 minutes, I can deal with that. If it takes me 2 hours, then I'm probably not going to do it. You know what I mean? But
well, and the other thing to think about, in the TOC structure, and we see this all the time, people want to inject headings into the TOC structure, right? They want a heading level 2, heading level 3, and they want to compartmentalize it. What you need to remember is that, yes, you can use headings, but every time you break your TOC up with a heading, you need to start a new TOC. So if you've got chapter 1 and then your TOC, but you made chapter 1 text say heading level 1, then just that little bit is a TOC until you get to the next heading. You should never have H1, H2, H3 on down the line embedded into your TOC. It's an improper use of a heading level structure element. So just know that it's okay to have several TOCs in your document. You might have a TOC for the figures and a TOC for the tables and a TOC for your body content or the appendix. All good, all fine. They just need to be separate TOCs, right?
Now, there's one other thing we wanted to bring up, Dax. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but the other example of nested tag structure is for tables, right?
Right.
Um, and I mean, fundamentally, a table is compliant if you have a table tag. Inside of the table tag is table rows, and within
TRs.
the
Yep.
rows are your cells. Yeah,
Right.
TRs, and then within the TRs, TD or THs. However, and again, this kind of goes back to the source application. Some source applications like to divide the table content up into T head, T body, and then while we're at it, T foot. Right
Right.
there is a T foot that can be used
You
as well.
hardly ever see T-foot
I
though.
know, yeah.
Nobody really puts a running. I was trying to explain to somebody asked me about that. They're like, when do you use a T-foot? I said, well, if you had a financial table that had a total row at the
Yeah.
bottom that you wanted to stay present on every page as a person kind of went from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 to always see that running total, that's where you might see a T-foot, but you hardly ever see it. The reason you see the T head, T foot, or the head, T body, T foot, is when you highlight that row in Word or in InDesign and you say, this is my header row, or in Word, when you say, repeat this header across the pages, then that triggers the use of a T head and a T body. The problem becomes when that table spans multiple pages, you get T head, T body, T head, T body, T head, T body for every page. And so as remediators, it's frustrating when you first start out because we tell you, look, visually, you need that. You want that so that someone looking at the page can have reference for every page. But for someone using assistive technology, you don't want to have that repeated in the data. So on one hand, it's a necessary function of visual accessibility, but it's a barrier for people who are using a screen reader,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. I mean, at its core, what you're describing is accessibility in a nutshell,
Yeah.
right? Because the repeating headers are beneficial to sighted users. For a sighted user, if you only give me one header at the top and I go 8 pages in looking at this table and I'm on page 8 and I'm like, oh, what's that header? And then I got to go back to page 1 to figure that out. That's a horrible experience, right?
Yeah.
So for the sighted user, it's valuable to have the repeating header. For a user of AT, it's unnecessary at best,
Right.
and it's disruptive at worst,
Right.
right? Because you're forced to read that header over and over again throughout the table, which is not a great experience. So, and then, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about, T head, T body, T foot is not voiced,
Right.
right? You would never even know that they were there. I think the benefit is more for the person remediating the file than anything.
Well, at
And
this point, the idea of the T head, T foot, T body is that some future technology might rework how it displays the table to you. Maybe it's mobile, maybe it's an app or whatever. And so it needs to know what region is the header for that table. And so it does have a purpose. However, it's definitely a pain in the butt to have to go in and remove all of those T heads. The nice thing about Common Look is because Common Look automatically artifacts anything you delete, you can just go in, select them all and hit delete and you're done.
sure.
And even in Access PDF, same thing. You can go in and delete those, and then you click the button that says artifact non-tagged elements, and they're all artifacted. So, either way, those tools, we talk about these tools all the time, guys. The tools are there to make it faster. They are not required, but boy, let me tell you, after doing this for as many years as we've been doing it, I would much rather spend 5 minutes on a table than 3 hours on a table. And that's a realistic estimate in some circumstances.
And I really hope we don't come across as salespeople when we bring up these products, because that's not the intent at all.
Yep.
It's really just about working efficiently, right?
Yeah.
And what you just said, Dax, I mean, what I love about Access PDF is I prefer to walk the tags tree in Acrobat.
Yep.
I just think it's easier than even easier than in Access PDF. And because I know in Access PDF, with a click of a button, I can artifact anything that's not tagged. I'll delete that row, that repeating header row in Acrobat. I'll just be like delete, where I normally tell people not to do that, because if they're relying on Acrobat as a remediation tool, you can't do that. That causes a new error, which is going to be untagged content. So to do it properly in Acrobat, you need to right click on all the marked content and say change tag to artifact.
Right.
That's kind of annoying, right?
It's a
But the
lot of
ability,
extra work.
it is. But knowing that I have Access PDF in my back pocket, I just go delete, I just get rid of it. And that way, when I take it in there, I just say artifact everything. And it's really nice. It's a really nice workflow. I was going to say one more. Oh, and then the other thing with the tables, T head, T body, if you use T head, you have to use T body.
Right. You can't just have T head, or you can't have a T body without a T head.
Right. And I'll tell you when that happens. Those of our listeners who are InDesign users, if you have a table that does not have a column header, but only has a row header, right? You typically, in InDesign, natively, there's nothing you can do, right? All you can do is kind of let it go. The problem is that InDesign will automatically tag everything as a T body, right? And we could argue that InDesign is messing up. InDesign should know better than to be able to only put a T body in there, because it's going to cause a problem for us, right?
Yeah.
So, and the fix is, in the PDF, just drag the rows out of the T body and then delete the T body, right? That's how you fix that problem.
Well, and in Common Look, you can say find all children of a T body, or find all tags that have a T body as a parent and level them up, right? Which is really, really nice.
It would be level up children, right?
Right.
Yeah. Level up children. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was going to say something else, and now I've forgotten what it was about the tables. Oh, just know, guys, that if you have a table and you're thinking about using the caption tag, PDF UA says the caption should be the first or last child of the table tag. However, assistive technology, NVDA and JAWS will not read a properly nested caption. So if you're going to use the figure 4.5 table 3 as a caption, just keep it as a caption tag outside, above the table or below the table, but be consistent in how you use it, either above or below, every single time. So we should do another podcast on tables, just in general, kind of best practices for tables. We should definitely do that. So
that sounds like fun.
Yeah. Chad, as we close out, I want to let people know that our next 3 classes, you are teaching all 3 of those classes. So we have coming up, actually, when this podcast airs, it will be, the next class will be InDesign on March 7th, InDesign Accessibility Best Practices. And then the following class will be Accessible Forms, which we do cover Word and the struggles of Word to PDF forms, but it's mostly about InDesign and how to use InDesign to create a form that is compliant, that can get you all the way to the finish line, or mostly to the finish line, and not having to do a bunch of extra stuff in the PDF. So if you guys are listening to this podcast right now, we're going to give you, normally if you follow us, we always give you $75 off. That's kind of our norm. I'm going to give you $100 off either one of those things. So use the coupon code podcast at checkout, and it will take a total of $100 off each one of those courses, Chad.
Wow.
What do you think?
That's a deal. That's a deal, man.
So, and we only take about 15 people per class, period. We keep our classes small because we want you to have that unique experience of being able to ask us questions and really get those answers, that we can spend that time and make it individual. And what we found is any more than 15, the class starts to get unruly. But if you've got a team of more than that and you want to schedule us to do a private class, we're happy to do those. We do 3 and 6 hour classes, and they're pretty cheap. If your team's more than 10 people, they work out better than the online classes. So yeah,
I would say even 5 people. I think it's still a pretty decent
5's
deal.
kind of a wash between the online class and the in-person. But the nice thing about the private class is we use your material. We talk through your stuff. It's personalized to you, and you may not want to share all that with the rest of the people in the public class. So anyway, awesome.
All right, guys. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope you gained some insight. I know we kind of dove into the dregs of nested tag structure, but I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something, and it'll help you with your remediation moving forward. I just want to remind everybody, we had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that Dax and I are going to be at CSUN in March of this year. And Dax and I are going to be doing a pre conference session at CSUN on Monday, which is entitled Beyond the Checker Mastering PDF Accessibility Evaluation. So if you're going to be at CSUN and you're looking for a class to attend, yet there's still room, and you still can sign up for that. And then throughout the week, Dax and I are going to be presenting individual sessions. Dax is going to be presenting Beyond Compliance, 3 techniques for better infographics. And I'm
Yep.
going to have to sit on that one because I know it's going to be awesome. And then he's also going to be doing PowerPoint to PDF, overcoming the pain points. And anybody who's ever created PDFs out of PowerPoint knows the challenges of PowerPoint. And then I'm going to be presenting bridging the accessibility gap between Microsoft Word and PDF. So
Yeah.
we hope to see you there, and hope we get to meet some of you out there at CSUN.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening today. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.